it is my pleasure to welcome my dear friend, Professor Muqtedar Khan. Dr. Khan.
Thank you very much, Benji, Professor Raghuveer Mahabir. Thank you for inviting me. And once again, congratulations on hosting this international webinar. You have been consistently monitoring this particular crisis, and I'm sure your students and the strategic community in Trinidad and the Caribbeans are benefiting significantly from your contributions to and discussions, and also your master's program in national security studies. I also want to thank Murat. You did a great job, Murat. Doesn't mean that it will improve your grade in the class, but still, it was a good job. And I also want to thank Professor Saeed Sadek. He is a master, and Professor Umran from Iraq, and others, and ambassadors and generals who are also participating. With my respects to all of you. I'm not going to present a coherent argument. I'm not going to present a coherent argument or a point. I'm just going to share a few thoughts about the region. Since people have spoken a lot about the issue itself, I will talk a little bit more about the United States' role in the region and what it is doing to the region. So in that sense, I'll be touching upon whether there is a U.S. grand strategy influencing what the U.S. is trying to achieve in the region, or it is just ad hoc. So that's what I will do, and I'll also talk about some of the consequences of the conflict that we can see. So I have about 6 or 7 points, and I will share them with you. But before that, I want to make a point that we are witnessing a genocide in real time. We are witnessing a genocide in real time, and in spite of all the fancy concepts that scholars like us have created, like R2P, how often have you heard the phrase R2P, responsibility to protect, being invoked by the guardians of the global order? When did you last hear Joe Biden say that we have a responsibility to protect? He seems to be committed. He has an ironclad commitment to Israel. Before this conflict, I used to say in jest, I used to joke, that what does it mean to have an ironclad commitment? Does it mean that if Israel committed a genocide, you would still support it? Well, Joe Biden has given an answer to us, that he thinks that he can continue arming Israel indefinitely, supporting it with money. We've already sent over $20 billion there, over 100 transfers of weapons in the past 1 year to Israel. So, but no one talks about responsibility to protect. Countries like South Africa have stepped up to become the moral guardians of our international system, and they have gone to International Criminal Court. And if you notice, the International Criminal ICJ, the International Court of Justice, has not yet responded to ICC's request for arrest warrants for Netanyahu and some of the Hamas activists and the defense minister of Israel. On the Hamas side, probably all people will be dead by the time, if at all, ICJ ever issues a warrant or even explains why it hasn't yet issued them. So the first thing I want to do is to basically, hopefully, embarrass humanity by saying you're witnessing a genocide in real time and you're doing nothing. Basically nothing. So that is the point I think we need to. So when we talk about identity, values, religion, importance especially of our adherence to values, just keep in mind that we have witnessed a genocide and we have done very little to stop it. The second point that I want to make is that this is not a conflict between just Israel and the Palestinians. The way I want to characterize this is that this is a conflict between US proxies and Iranian proxies. So this is basically a struggle for hegemony in the Middle East between Iran and the United States. Israel is US proxy and Iran has its own proxies in the region. The United States usually focuses on 4 regions, and the 4 regions are basically the Western Hemisphere, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. The the US doesn't really care about the rest of the world. So its focus on these four regions are critical for it. So in that sense, you can say the US grand strategy is about selective domination. There are some parts of the world it really doesn't care, but the parts of the world that the US cares, it wishes to maintain absolute domination in those regions. And those regions, I repeat, are the Western Hemisphere, where the US enjoys unchallenged hegemony. And then it's Middle East, Europe, and Asia. We are living in an era where the US hegemony and domination in all those three areas are being challenged. The challenges are very serious. You can see Iran challenging the US in the Middle East. You can see Russia challenging Europe and NATO. Russia challenging Europe and NATO in Europe, and the United States, of course. And China is challenging the United States hegemony in East Asia. The US is a very complex player. It has many allies in every part of the world. And so yet it is facing this severe challenge in all three regions of the world, and that is what the US is fighting for. So it's basically fighting two hot wars, one in Europe to quell the Russian rebellion, one in the Middle East to quell the Iranian revolution, and it is using other forms of warfare, economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, etc., to suppress the potential rise of of China and its rebellion in that region. So I want you to also think of this as a possible, as US, essentially it's a US war in the Middle East to sustain US hegemony, and Israel has become an instrument of that. Israel has no desire to sustain US hegemony. They exercise hegemony over the US in some ways. You know, the famous phrase, the tail wagging the dog. And that has been apparent on so many occasions where Netanyahu has simply refused to listen to Biden, and Biden has no choice but continue to support him. So that is my second point that I want to make about it, is from the global structure and US foreign policy perspective. From the proxy's point of view, this is clearly an asymmetrical challenge. I think Iran's GDP, I mean, there's a lot of confusion on how Iran's GDP is measured. Even IMF and World Bank, there's a huge disparity. Iran is somewhere between $450 billion to about $1 trillion. Basically, this economy is smaller than, either it's smaller than United Arab Emirates or it is smaller than Saudi Arabia, depending on how you're measured. And so the United States, economically speaking, is nearly 30 times bigger than Iran. The US defense budget is nearly double Iran's total economy. So there is no comparison yet Iran is able to challenge, or at least presenting a challenge to US domination and US hegemony. Primarily because the cost of projecting power across regions is much, much more than exercising power in your own neighborhood. So the cost of the US projecting power in the Middle East far outstrips Iran's ability to do it. And plus, Iran has found a way to project power which is cheap. Like it has this Kmart version of regional hegemony using proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis. But I also want to point out to you that several myths have been exposed by this conflict.
Excuse me, Professor Khan,
Yeah.
your volume has gone down.
Yeah, I want to share with you that several myths about Israel have been exposed in this conflict. For whatever reason, Israel was considered as the most powerful country in the region. The United States is committed to maintaining a qualitative superiority of Israeli military capability over the Arabs. Basically, the United States wants to keep Israel strong enough to fight all the Arab countries alone. But in this particular conflict, if you look at what happened on October 7, the horrible Hamas attacks on Israel, which killed about 1,200 people, including, I think, over 900 civilians. Women were also abused. It was a terrible attack. What Hamas did was horrible. But Hamas had more than 6-7 hours inside Israel. There was an intelligence failure. Didn't the Israelis know that Hamas was going to attack? I find it absolutely stunning that a country that can pull off a spectacular attack like the attack on Hezbollah's beepers and Hezbollah's walkie-talkies does not know that its border, southern border, has been breached by an enemy, that they have been more or less in a hostile situation for the last 16 years. So there was a failure of Israeli intelligence. Unless you want to resort to conspiracy theories to say that Netanyahu allowed the Hamas fighters to come into Israel and commit some limited atrocities in the hope that it would give him a carte blanche to basically redesign the Middle East with wars that he's fighting on 7 fronts. So it was, I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories, so we will go by the assumption it was an intelligence failure on a part of Israel. They did not anticipate something like this. The explanation that is advanced by others is that, okay, it was Israeli hubris, overconfidence. The Arabs can't do anything. They're incompetent, and so how can they pull this off? And then a security failure. They couldn't protect the population for several hours that Hamas fighters were there. But that's not all. From day one, the United States has basically been holding Israel's hand in this war, providing weapons on a daily basis, providing billions of dollars in aid. Over $20 billion have been given to Israel for this, and obviously providing diplomatic protection, especially in the UN Security Council. Why does Israel need so much help from the United States? In fact, the US is fighting some of Israel's battles, especially against the Houthis and the Houthis' attacks on oil ships in the region, which eventually leads to the Suez Canal, etc. So the fact that the United States has repeatedly engaged in battles, and most importantly, every time Iran has attacked Israel, it is not just the US that is protecting Israel, but it's also Arab countries like Jordan and the United Kingdom was also part of the defense. So you have a conglomeration of international allies coming to Israel's protection. So one of the things that I think is exposed is the myth of Israeli power in the region. It actually cements Israeli dependence on the US. If Israel had stood alone and Netanyahu had told the Americans, just stay out of this fight, just protect us at the UN Security Council and let us handle our challenges, then perhaps Israel would have achieved a massive deterrence. If it could have crushed Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, and the Houthis on its own, without the daily military assistance from the United States, then we could talk of it as a really dominant military power. But now we realize that Israel is profoundly dependent on the United States for its existence. This is an amazing amount of leverage that is now available to the US presidents. We are not going to be electing Zionists as presidents frequently. This is once in a lifetime deal that Joe Biden was elected as president in 2020 and Hamas chose to attack Israel just when the US had the most pro-Israel president ever. And a man with a heart that is capable of watching 30,000 women and children die and yet send weapons for more to be killed. So that is one major development, I think. And while the Western media and scholars here are not taking note of it, I think people in other parts of the region must be realizing this. I have talked to generals from the Indian Army on my show. I host a show called Khanversations on YouTube. Please subscribe to that channel. So I've spoken to generals, and they have expressed enormous amount of surprise at how Israel had initially failed to protect itself and how dependent it is on the United States. So I think one of the things that has come out is the exposure of Israel. The other part is, if you notice, except for Germany and to some extent Great Britain, who are providing weapons, etc., Israel has been isolated more or less from the international community. Apparently there are no flights leaving Tel Aviv's international airport, because nobody is going to Israel and Israelis are not going anywhere else. So Israel has been isolated. There are 3 countries in Europe which have now recognized the Palestinian state. But more importantly, if Macron had not subverted democracy in France and allowed the biggest party to form government, which was the left, then even France would have recognized the Palestinian state. So there is a huge impact there. But one more point that I want to make is about the exposure of the Arab world. The Arabs, I think, I'm sorry to say, even if this, at the risk of sounding incompetent, racist, the Arabs have come across as the most incompetent people on planet Earth at the moment. It's a failed region. I mean, not just failed countries. I mean, Said was talking about how there are failed countries like Syria and Sudan and Yemen and Iraq. I mean, the whole region is failed. What's the point of having OIC and IDB and Arab League? You have, and all this talk of ummah. I feel like throwing up now every time I hear the word ummah, that you have not been able to come up with a collective security arrangement in 70 years or 50 years of countries becoming independent from European imperialism and colonialism. So it's just talk. They are unable to defend themselves. The only time Arab countries have got into military action is to protect Israel, not the Palestinians. Yes, there are statements here. There are small actions of resistance. The Qatari sheikh refuses to meet Blinken. MBS will probably have some naval exercises with the Iranians. I mean, this is ridiculous. Beyond that, nothing. In fact, it appears. I need to put my power cord. It appears that countries like Saudi Arabia are just waiting for this conflict to end so that they can go and genuflect to Israel and become part of the Abrahamic Accords. So the Arab world's incompetence, its inability to stand up for itself, its constant dependence on, it's like they're always looking for a sugar daddy. Can you please protect us? They're afraid of Iran. They can't negotiate with Iran and form a regional bulwark against external forces. And that is the failure of Arabs as a region, as countries. And there is also an inability to understand. So, for example, look at Saudi Arabia. Is it inside BRICS or is it out? Has it joined the BRICS or has it not? It's not clear. But it attends BRICS events. MBS doesn't go, the foreign minister goes. And the reason for that is because they're afraid of upsetting the US and also holding this hope that one day they can join the Abrahamic Accords. But if they're part of BRICS, I don't think they will be able to join the Abrahamic Accords. I don't know, because UAE is part of the Abrahamic Accords and it is also part of BRICS. So it's very difficult to understand the foreign policies of the Arab countries. And for that matter, even Turkey and Pakistan, they talk a lot, but so there is no regional cooperation, etc. So one astonishing fact that comes across is the uselessness of the Muslim world entirely. They can't come to help. So what does it matter if there are 2 billion Muslims on earth or 3 billion? They are as useless as ever. But the only Muslims who seem to be having an impact are Muslims in the West. For example, the Muslim population in Europe has had a huge impact on the British elections. About 26 to 27 pro-Gaza candidates got elected to the British Parliament, and single issue candidates. They did not talk about anything else except Gaza, and 26 or 25 or 27 got elected to the British Parliament. The leftist party in France was heavily supported. I mean, if you look at the rallies of the French left parties, they were having more of Palestinian flags there than you saw the French flag. So in that sense, you could argue that Muslims and Arabs in Europe have had a huge impact, far more impact than the so-called Arab street, which has disappeared. There is no Arab street now. Where is the Arab anger against what is happening in Gaza? And then if you look at Muslims and Arabs in North America, especially the United States, they are about to have a huge impact on the US elections. Joe Biden is perhaps one of the most humiliated presidents in American history. His own party told him, "You are no good, please go away." After winning the primaries, he was pulled out. And one of the reasons for Joe Biden withdrawing, besides the fact that he has Joe Biden was always like this. It's just slightly more exaggerated. If you go back and look at him, even when he was Vice President Obama, he was referred to as the gaffe machine. So he was quite capable of saying stupid things all the time. And now he was just only saying stupid things. That's why the party just got rid of him after his performance in the debate. But the real reason for him being pushed out was the polling in critical states, especially like Pennsylvania. So when you look at the battleground states, the uncommitted vote in the United States, especially Muslims and Arabs, 700,000 of them who voted in the primaries, have clearly sent the message that they're going to have an influence. It is quite possible that their role in the coming elections will be decisive, whether they do it or not. The point remains that they have done more for the Palestinian cause here in the United States than the 300 million Arabs who live in the Arab world. The only thing the Arabs have done is occasionally fly planes and send their daughters to defend Israel from Iran. So I think that we are looking at a global system where there is tremendous transition taking place. The United States hegemony is being challenged everywhere. The US is fighting in the Middle East not for Israel's right to exist or to defend Israeli existence. It is a byproduct of what the US is really trying to do. It is trying to defend its own hegemony and domination in the Middle East. It wants to keep China and Russia out of it. Not only that, it does not want any regional hegemon from becoming dominant in the region. So basically, the US is fighting to keep Iran down and Russia and China out. So with those remarks, I'm going to stop, and I look forward to questions and answers if there are any. Thank you very much once again, Benji, for hosting this, for all of you for participating and listening to me. Thank you.